Today was one of the most insane weekends in college football history. There is so much that happened. There were teams that eliminated themselves in the playoff. There were so many almost upsets, so many great finishes, and so many games that had so much on the line. I thought instead of trying to cover each and every game, I'm just going to go through all of today's big games, all of today's big moments, give my analysis and give my thoughts, and we have a lot to talk about. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe as we're on the road to 100K, leave a like if you want to support today's video, drop your thoughts down below, and let me know what player, topic, team, or situation I can cover next. Now, let's get started. I'm going in no particular order. I'm just picking on random games and going for it. The first one we're going to talk about is Oklahoma versus Oklahoma State. And what some are saying is the final Bedlam game. This game did not really live up to the hype. Oklahoma got out to an early 28-0 lead, and while the final score was 28-13, this game was not as close as the score indicates. Oklahoma State was ranked number 22, but honestly, this didn't really seem like an upset to me. This game was at home, it's a rivalry, and Oklahoma put it together, and they are now 6-5, and while it has been a disappointing season, beating your arch rival is always great, and for Oklahoma State, I think they've dropped 4 of their last 5 games. They don't look very good, and I always thought they were overrated going into the season, and if they lose next week, then this will be a very disappointing season for them. Overall, Bedlam went exactly how I expected, with Oklahoma cruising. Next game I'm going to talk about is Indiana and Michigan State. What's really sad is Michigan State blew their chance at a bowl game. Indiana has pretty much nothing going for it right now, as they are beaten up, and at 4-7, they have no chance of making a bowl. Michigan State, on the other hand, needed to win this game. It was at home, they played a bad team, and they just should have won. With just over 10 seconds to go, Michigan State had what I think was about an 18-yard field goal, but they hooked it left. In overtime, both teams blocked each other's kicks, and then eventually Indiana scored a touchdown and Michigan State failed to convert, and IU won 39-31. This game had a lot on the line, because Michigan State's only hopes of making a bowl now are going on the road and beating a good Penn State team. I don't think it's going to happen, and I think Mel Tucker's team is going to drop to 5-7, and with Tom Allen winning this game, and if he can somehow beat Purdue next week, he can save his job there. There was a lot on the line in East Lansing today. Up next, we need to talk about Georgia Tech and North Carolina. The Drake May Heisman hype was really getting going the last couple of weeks, but unfortunately, both his Heisman campaign and North Carolina's playoff hopes are over. While the Tar Heels will end up going to the ACC Championship game, they dropped to 9-2 after they lost at home to Georgia Tech. The Tar Heels were heavy favorites in this game, and despite Georgia Tech losing their top 2 quarterbacks, they found a way to win 21-17, scoring 21 unanswered points and converting multiple first downs on their final drive, and they won 21-17, giving Brent Key, Georgia Tech's interim head coach, a good chance at keeping that job, knocking North Carolina out of the playoff hunt. And if they can somehow beat Georgia next week, they'll be going to a bowl game. Up next, I want to talk about Iowa and Minnesota. The 2 schools I root for the most are Purdue and Mizzou, and if Purdue wants to go to the Big Ten Championship, they needed to win out, and they needed Iowa to lose. Minnesota hosted the Hawkeyes at home today, and Minnesota absolutely blew it not only for Boilermakers fans, but for themselves. They had 2 costly turnovers in the second half, couldn't really get anything going, and despite them being at home and playing one of the worst Iowa offenses in years, Minnesota could not get it together, and they lost 13-10, and now Iowa is a win against Nebraska away from going to the Big Ten Championship in back-to-back years, and who would have saw that coming? This has been a somewhat disappointing season for Coach Fleck. Now to Tennessee, South Carolina. I knew South Carolina was going to hang around in this game, but I did not think they would win in this fashion. The Gamecocks scored 8 touchdowns, Hendon Hooker got hurt, and they were beating Tennessee the entire game. From the very first score, Williams-Brice Stadium was completely electric, and they won 63-38, eliminating Tennessee from the college football playoff, ending their storybook season, giving Shane Beamer his biggest win of his tenure, and now they have a lot of momentum going into Clemson, and who knows how South Carolina will finish. This was a shocking result and a huge win for the Gamecocks. Illinois and Michigan was going to be a classic Big Ten November game, but it looked like Michigan was going to run away with it after they scored an early touchdown. Illinois would punch back, the defense would tighten up, and Chase Brown had 2 touchdowns in the second half, giving Illinois a 17-10 lead. Michigan ended up kicking 2 field goals, and after they got a stop, they would drive down the field, and Jake Moody would hit his 4th field goal of the night, giving Michigan a 19-17 win, keeping their undefeated record alive, their playoff hopes alive, and ending Illinois' chances at going to the Big Ten Championship. Brett Bielema and Illinois have been very impressive this season, and this was a great game, but this was huge for Michigan's Big Ten title hope, huge for momentum, and a game they had to win. Unfortunately, Blake Corum is hurt, and I hope he will be healthy against Ohio State next weekend. Illinois also had a great year, and they'll likely finish 8-4 with a win against Northwestern next weekend. Texas versus Kansas. This has been Kansas's best season in a long time, and this was also the return of Jalen Daniels. Ultimately, I thought Texas was going to win, but Kansas just flat out didn't do anything. They got blown out the entire game from start to finish, as Texas's ground game went insane, as Bijan Robinson had 243 yards and 4 touchdowns, and Jonathan Brooks had over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Jalen Daniels was just above average in this game, and while it was a disappointing finish for Kansas, they can hang their hat on having a great season, and this just builds more momentum for Texas. Some are saying this is the worst Wisconsin football team in years, and I definitely have to agree with this. After being down pretty much the entire game, Wisconsin scored 2 late touchdowns, and eventually they won 15-14, and this does help Wisconsin punch a bowl game and have a chance at a 7-5 record. And for Nebraska, this is another heartbreaking close loss, and likely means they will move on from Mickey Joseph. It was a close and wild Big Ten finish, and unfortunately, like always, harms Nebraska. Another underrated game of the day was NC State and Louisville, as Louisville's been one of the hottest teams in the country, despite losing to Clemson last weekend. NC State's one of the coldest teams in the country, and I had no idea why they were ranked after losing to Boston College. They ended up going on the road to Louisville, and Louisville controlled this game pretty much from the get-go and won 25-10. And what an impressive turnaround it has been for Scott Satterfield and the Cardinals. And if they now can beat Kentucky, they'll have an 8-4 season and can go to a pretty good bowl game. And for NC State, it's been a disappointing year. USC UCLA. This is probably the most hyped up this game has been in years, and it ended up coming down to the wire. Caleb Williams put on a show and continued his Heisman race, and DTR unfortunately threw a late interception, which will haunt his legacy and will haunt UCLA, as they are now eliminated from the Pac-12 title race, and that is an extremely tough loss for Bruins fans. USC now cruises to a 10-1 record, their playoff hopes are still alive, and if they can beat Notre Dame and win in the Pac-12 championship, they are going to have an opportunity to go to the college football playoff in year 1 under Lincoln Riley, and Caleb Williams is pushing himself into that Heisman conversation. What a classic game we had, and unfortunately one team had to lose. TCU Baylor was also insane. This game went back and forth in the second half, and after TCU took a lead, they ended up missing an extra point, which would come back to haunt them. Baylor would put up 2 unanswered touchdowns, and TCU scored with just a few minutes remaining, but they would have to go for 2, and TCU's running back dropped the ball, and they were down 28-26. They ended up holding firm and got a stop against Baylor, where they drove down the field, and after weird clock management on 3rd down, found a way to make a game-winning kick and keep their playoff hopes alive. They won 29-28 in an instant classic, have kept their 11-0 record, have kept their playoff hopes alive, and this was one of the most insane games of the day, and tough for Baylor. This game's not really talked about a whole lot, but Texas Tech and Iowa State had a lot on the line. Iowa State was expected to make a bowl game this year, while Texas Tech was expected to be at the bottom of the Big 12. Instead, the roles have been reversed. Iowa State has struggled to win any sort of close games or get anything going on offense, but if they could just win this game today, they would still have a chance at a bowl game. Texas Tech ended up scoring a touchdown with 6 minutes remaining, and that would be the nail in the coffin for Iowa State's disappointing season, and now Texas Tech will have an opportunity to get one more win, and it's been a very good season for Coach McGuire there. For a while, it looked like Arkansas was going to put up 100 on Ole Miss before they ever got going. Ultimately, Arkansas only won 42-27, but this was a tough game for Ole Miss, as it showed that they were pretty much overrated all season long. Lane Kiffin will have his work cut out for him next year, and it was a tough way to end the season for Rebels fans. For Arkansas though, this was very promising. After a disappointing season, they have now found a way to get to a bowl game, they blew out a ranked team at home, and now they have an opportunity to get a 7th win against a struggling Missouri team. As a Mizzou fan, I was kind of intrigued for a 5-6 versus 5-6 matchup, but ultimately, it's still going to be a fun game this upcoming Friday, and congrats to Arkansas on the win, and they can still win 8 games, which would be very impressive for them. Before we get into our last 2 games, be sure to leave your thoughts down below, and also leave a like. The first one I want to talk about is Florida and Vanderbilt. After a strong start with an upset victory over Utah, Florida has struggled to have any sort of consistency, but at 6-5, they were expected to go on the road and beat Vanderbilt. Usually that would be a guarantee, but last week Vanderbilt upset Kentucky, and they are desperately trying to get to a bowl game. They played well the entire night, Mike Wright had a great day at quarterback, and they ended up winning 31-24 and got a late stop against Florida, and their push for a bowl game continues. Florida State should be a good game next week, and Vanderbilt is 1 win away from making a bowl game. While they do have to host Tennessee, I can't think of a better time for them to play Tennessee after they got blown out and after their playoff and SEC title hopes are gone, so we'll see what happens, and while I'm going to pick Tennessee to win that game, Who knows, and if Vanderbilt can win that third straight game, it'll be an insane season. Clark Lee's Commodores will be on the rise, and that'll be great for Vanderbilt and the conference as a whole. The final game I want to talk about is Ohio State and Maryland. Ohio State controlled this game early on, but they let Maryland in, and after a couple of crazy plays, it looked like the Terrapins were going to have a chance to upset Ohio State. Midway through the fourth quarter, Ohio State turned it over on downs, but Maryland stalled and went 3 and out, and ultimately, Ohio State went down and kicked a field goal and went up 6. When Maryland had a chance to go down and win the game, Talia got sacked, players walked back to the line of scrimmage, and then they had some sort of pick six scoop and score play, and Ohio State ended up winning 43-30. The game was a lot closer than the score says. Maryland almost pulled off this upset, and now Ohio State is undefeated going into the Michigan game, has some momentum, and they found a new star at running back and true freshman Dallin Hayden. For Maryland, they are 6-5 and have had a couple of close calls against some of the better teams in the Big Ten, and while it was a disappointing finish, they can hang their hat on having a good season as they could still win 7 to 8 games. So yeah, today we did a recap of all the insane games in college football, went through all the crazy finishes, I gave my thoughts, and now I want to hear yours. Let me know down below your thoughts on the games, let me know your thoughts on next week's games, and give me a player, topic, team, or situation I could cover in my next video. Before you go, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.